Speaker kicking us off this week. Xandria, this is I've only ever seen your last name on paper. I don't want to butcher it.
Okay, so there are two ways to say it. Either Quichocho, so almost how it looks, or Kitutsu, which is how we say it on the island. But I grew up saying both, and Quichocho is a little easier. So
that was like my second guess. I feel like all the French lessons I took in middle school, I always want to say like qui with the first syllable, which is not correct. So I'm glad I asked. I am very happy to welcome Xandria Quichocho, who is coming to us from Michigan State University, where they are currently a graduate student. They are previously a physics undergrad at the University of Texas, where we met when they were giving a presentation on, I know, your research on learning assistants, but I was really interested on your work in kind of intersectional identities in physics students and how that affects kind of their perception of themselves in the world of physics and science. So I'm very, very excited that we have you here today. For one note for anyone attending there, because we are in a webinar mode, there is a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions during the chat, Q&A is the best way to put them, and that way we have them and can address them after. Yeah, it's awkward in webinar because we don't have like the back and forth. So usually we do the questions right after. But the stage is yours, so take it away.
Great. I always forget how webinars work because I was like, we'll use the chat, but we'll see.
I know, never on that side of it.
Yeah. All right. So I'm going to, of course, share my screen. Let me make sure I'm going to be sharing the right screen. Let's see. So while I'm getting this up and running, CalBridge is all over California, right?
It started in Southern California, but it's expanded into the whole state.
Okay, that's what I thought. I was just in LA this weekend, which was super duper fun. I got back yesterday. Again, this is just while I'm putting all of this together. There is a subset of Twitter. Are y'all all seeing the right version? Are you seeing just the title screen?
Yes.
Nice. I was in, I'm not sure if who all is very, very like versed in Lord of the Rings, especially Lord of the Rings Twitter, because right now on Lord of the Rings Twitter, there is a resurgence of Lord of the Rings queer Twitter. And so there was a birthday party in LA for Bilbo and Frodo. And a lot of the queer people from Lord of the Rings queer Twitter were like, oh, we're gonna go hang out at Bilbo's birthday party. And I was like, I will fly to LA to meet queer Twitter for Tolkien. It was great. Weather was lovely. I love California. I'm from Northern California originally. Okay, but we are going to get started on actual talk things. So the title of the talk is Intersectional Identity Development of Multiply Marginalized Physics Students. And real quick, because I am from Northern California and not from Texas, I have a tendency to talk a little fast. So please tell me to slow down if I need to slow down. I get very excited. So I'm Xandria Quichocho. My primary advisor and principal investigator is Dr. Eleanor W. Close at Texas State University. I am currently a graduate student at Michigan State University. So I have both of those titles there. And there is also a QR code. It's going to be at the end of the presentation as well. But the QR code links to all previous presentations on this like specific topic that I've given. Papers, manuscripts. So if you want to learn more, and if you get like really, really excited and want to see more videos, I'm going to show 2 videos from one person today, but if you want to see more videos, you absolutely have that opportunity if you go to the QR code. So I want to start with acknowledging my education research group at Texas State. All of our very, very cool grants. We might have gotten another. I need to update this. But I'm very, very thankful for all the people who have been able to help me out during my undergrad and currently at Texas State University. And also everybody who is at Michigan State University. All of our faculty, our postdocs, and our undergraduate students. It's a massive program coming from a small, comparatively regional university. And so it's really, really cool to be able to see like this breadth of research that is happening at Michigan State. And so I did not copy and paste the next slide, but I will pull it up So I also want to start with a land acknowledgement for California. This is actually from my quick Google search. California Legislature, AB 1968 Tribal Land Acknowledgement Act of 2020. And so since Cal State and the Cal Bridge program is all over the state, I wasn't able to like find, or it wouldn't be right to just find a land acknowledgement for the specific university because you're all at lots of different kinds of universities. And so parts of this legislature state that the tribal land acknowledgement is a formal statement that recognizes and respects Native American peoples as traditional stewards of this land and the enduring relationship that exists between Native peoples and their traditional lands. To recognize the land is an expression of gratitude and appreciation to those whose homelands we reside on, and is a recognition of the original people and nations who have been living and working on the land since time immemorial. The tribal land acknowledgement statement encourages individuals to think about what it means to occupy space on Native American lands. These statements recognize the traditional land of the Native American people in the state who called and still call the land home before and after the arrival of settlers. The tribal land acknowledgement provides a learning opportunity for individuals who may have never heard the names of the tribes that continue to live and learn from the land. Land acknowledgement is a Native American tribal protocol, and the practice establishes a respectful routine and habit of offering reconciliation. Tribal land acknowledgement is a transformative act that works to undo the intentional erasure of Indigenous peoples from the nationalist colonial narrative and is the first step in decolonizing land relations. So I think it's cool that there's a whole statewide land acknowledgement without the names, of course, but I think it's still pretty neat. And so here's a quick one from San Marcos, where I am currently. We're gonna get to that in a second. But we want to acknowledge the land that we have convened on has long served as a site of meeting and exchange among Indigenous peoples. The land now known as Central Texas, which was traditionally territory to peoples including, but not limited to, the Tonkawa, Lipan Apache, Drumanos, Sana, Maiken Garza tribe, and the Coehulictan people. Boop. Oh, I also forgot to copy paste another thing. We're going to talk about that later. And so a quick overview of where we're going to be going, what I'm going to be talking about inside of this talk. We're going to go a little bit or a lot, depending on your opinion, about me, about what I do, about what got me into PER. Then we're going to go into some theoretical background. We're not going to go into too much because it can get kind of dense, especially because it's not traditional physics that we learned out of the classroom. And then we're going to watch a couple of videos that are examples of identity development and like examples of the interviews that I do. So again, we're going to start talking about me, and then we're going to be done talking about me. My animations are off, but I am very bad at math, which is really fun when I tell people that I do physics, because they're just like, how? And I'm just like, I like concepts. I don't do the numbers. I get the computer to do the numbers for me. So again, my name is Xandria Raymond Gitsutsu. Those are my three sisters when we were very, very young. That's me in timeout, which is where I spent most of my childhood, in the corner, because I was doing things that I was not supposed to be doing, like climbing on rocks and things. I actually started my education at Texas Lutheran University. It's also inside of Central Texas, but not in STEM. I started as a music education major. I play the cello. I teach cello still. But when I was at Texas Lutheran University, I wasn't able to find a community that I felt like a part of, and not for lack of trying. I did a whole sorority, which was fun, but I wasn't able to like find people who kind of like got my background and like understood my lived experiences as a whole. And I suffered from a lot of anxiety and depression at the time, the 2 years that I spent there. And so I decided to switch, and not just switch universities, I decided to switch majors as well. So I went from a whole shift into physics at Texas State University because physics is easier than music, in my opinion, especially music major. And my original goal in starting physics at Texas State was to do astrophysics because I love Star Trek. I love space. It's really, really cool. I would learn about like volcanoes on other planets. I have no idea. It was wild. But I got involved with the Learning Assistant program at Texas State to use my education knowledge for my music program to learn how to teach physics. And then I kind of just got sucked into doing PER because I found it really, really interesting. And I felt like I could kind of not change things, but I felt like there was like work that could be done that I really, really wanted to do. So I kind of threw astrophysics off to the side Also read like astrobites, but like that's the extent of it. And during my time at Texas State University, with my background of having anxiety and depression, I started going to regular therapy. I got on anti-anxiety medication. I got on ADHD medication this year, which apparently a lot of people did during the pandemic. We went on gender journeys and we went on ADHD journeys, apparently. And I was able to find community, build community, make friends and have mentors. I came out to myself and to my family and my friends. And so I was really able to share myself with my family and share and live as my authentic self while at Texas State University. So it was a really, really positive thing that ended up leading me to graduating, luckily. Being able to take care of my mental health and my physical health and just understanding who I am as a person, or starting to really aided my ability to actually focus on the physics, if that makes any sense, because I wasn't too in my head about like where I fit in, which was again due to the community that I was in the physics program. And so those are all my sisters. No one has a black eye in that picture, and we're all a lot older. And so there is my family, my mom, my stepdad, and my sisters again. And this is Dr. Eleanor Close, the PI on this project, who is my advisor and mentor. Very, very exciting. I'm actually teaching her kiddo a cello lesson tomorrow afternoon. So we're doing more cello lessons. So currently I am in a physics PhD program at Michigan State University. I'm in San Marcos, Texas, because it is my second year into this program. And with the ongoing pandemic, I felt it safer for both my mental health and just my physical health to stay closer to family in Texas and take a leave of absence this year. So I'm still updated on like the current research goings ons of the research groups that I'm a part of their PER program. But I couldn't do online school. My advisor was like, let's not have you try to do online school if that's not what you're comfortable with and that's not how you're going to succeed. And if you're going to be worrying about the pandemic the whole entire time, literally across the nation. And after my physics PhD, I'm not entirely sure. There's a wide breadth of things I could do if I get the PhD, if I decide to leave the program and leave academia. There's a whole wide world and it's all very exciting. So again, a little bit more about me. I usually save this for later, but we're going to come back to this slide, but a little emptier. This is my intersectionality slide. So that might be a word that y'all have heard before. Throw it in the chat if you have. I'm going to ask you to define it later inside of your own words. But I really wanted to make a pictorial representation of my identities and the identities of people who I talk to. And because I'm asking my participants inside of my research study to share themselves with strangers, because they're not at these presentations, they aren't standing up here with me, they're all anonymized, but I'm asking them to share their identities and share themselves with other people. And so I felt it right that I would do the same, which actually helped me come out as both bisexual and as non-binary. You can see like the trajectory of my identities going on through my intersectionality slide. It's very, very fun. So I identify as non-binary transmasculine. My pronouns are they, he, and she interchangeably, but I do main they, them. So we can main they, them. I'm a physics PhD student. I'm a cello student. I am Black and Indigenous Chamorro. We are the native group of Guam. I'm bisexual. My family and me are lower middle class, which is a really fancy way of saying lower class. And my family is extremely important to me. And so I'm my mom's kid, I'm my sister's siblings, I'm an auntie, because an auntie is a vibe, not a gender title to me. And I'm a ZZ, which is another just like auntie title, but a little bit more gender neutral. And so going into physics education research, I wanted to, I'm not sure about how well versed everybody is in knowing what physics education research is. It's a very, very small field. It's growing a little bit, but there are two sects. There's quantitative and qualitative research. Quantitative is all about, not all about, but it primarily focuses on numbers and test results and figuring out like how to quantify how students are learning to help them learn more and learn what works for them and actually see like literal change in test scores, at least. Qualitative research, which is my area of research, is very personal. It takes an anthropological worldview. People like to say it's more sociological than it is physics, but because I am a physicist by training and because I'm talking to other physicists, it still is physics research. And the goal is to understand the view and the world of the participants that I have. So my research study specifically focuses on marginalized people's stories and experiences inside of physics as physics students. Again, I don't really like numbers. I have to do basic numbers sometimes at a scientific calculator. That's the most expensive calculator I will ever buy. It was $15 and it works for me. So I don't have a lot of numerical data. My data though is diary entries or interviews or recordings of students in classes. I could be observing them inside of their natural environment, inside of the physics classroom. I can pull them aside and do one-on-one interviews with them. And the entire goal of this is to understand how these individuals interact and exist inside of their physics environments. And what interests me specifically and why it interests me is when I was in the Learning Assistant program, we went over issues of equity inside of physics. We went over issues of race and justice and equity and diversity and inclusion, like throughout the semester. It was a discussion-based course. And so when students would have lived experiences that they wanted to share about their primary school development, about how they interacted if they were non-traditional, I noticed there was a serious lack of literature that looked at marginalized students. And when it did, it either focused on Black men or white women. And so I went to Dr. Close's office in the middle of the afternoon and just slyly I did not sit down, slyly stood in the doorway, and I was like, I would like to read more about like brown women in physics. I'm a brown woman. I didn't know if I was a woman at the time. I'm a brown woman, and maybe like queer people. There's not a lot about queer people in physics. Not that I'm like a queer person, just a lot of queer friends. I was not out to myself at the time as well. And so she also noted this, being a physics education researcher, and said that she would do a preliminary search, see what she could find. When I saw her next week in class, she's like, there's almost nothing that looks at either, or there's a very small amount that looks specifically at racially minoritized women. And there's basically nothing that looks at queer physics students. And so I decided to put all of those together and just look at all of them, because why not? And we know that there is a serious issue of diversity inside of STEM. And if we look at physics and astronomy specifically, it's really, really upsetting. And so this is data from the NSF that I put together into a cute little graph that shows the bachelor's degrees earned by women of color as a percentage of total bachelor's degrees earned by the field. So this is everybody who earns a bachelor's degree inside of the field. As you can see, they are extremely low. Physics, engineering, and astronomy are also really, really low. Astronomy does go up a little bit higher because the total end number of students is actually lower. So it looks a little higher, but it's still not in the best place. So we do know there's an issue of retaining women of color, and especially inside of bachelor's degree program. But looking specifically at, not just looking at women, but specifically looking at women of color, we can see a larger disparity where the numbers are still extremely low compared to white women. This might be the wrong table. I'm gonna have to look at this later. Might be flipped. But it's a serious issue. And I really wanted to understand not just why people weren't inside of the field and why people were leaving the field, but also look at it from an anti-deficit perspective and ask them, what is it that makes you want to stay? And what support did you get that did make you stay, and how can we make that better? And trying to really, really see what their experiences were and how we can create these happy experiences in other departments. And that is the same slide. So we're gonna go on to part 2, which is going to talk a little bit more about the theoretical background that I use when doing this research. So the procedure is an interview-based procedure. It is largely qualitative. The interview protocol that I use has been developed over the last couple of years. It's based off of other studies looking at either queer students or Black students. And so we call it a semi-structured interview, which means that we have a list of questions that we're going to go through. But there are some that I will always ask participants. There's some that I might skip if they already talked about it, if I'm just we don't need to talk about that. But the real heart of the study, or the heart of the interview, is following where the participants go. So the participants can go off on this wild tangent on the side, and I, as the interviewer, am going to just follow them on that tangent and see what they do and see what stories they tell. And making sure that it's not too strict actually really brings out some amazing either conversations, it brings out some amazing ideas of community, getting to know this participant as a person. So one of my participants, we went on a tangent talking about like the best red lipstick brands, and like we like went through our own list and like rated them on how well we could eat a cheeseburger or a taco with them on, just to create this like personal attachment to each other. That's not just like I have my interview hat on and I'm going to be doing research on you, and making it very, very human. And then the interviewees that I have were found primarily through in-person social networks. And this is really, really important to note. We have gone over to other universities right before COVID hit. We're going to go to a couple more. But the students that I interviewed at Texas State, I already knew on a personal level. And so we do address this bias when we're coming into the writing about how I'm coming to them. Like, while I am coming to them as a researcher and an interviewer, I do have a personal friendship-based relationship with them, but it does help establish trust inside of this conversation, because there's a lot of vulnerability that comes in when we're having these conversations about like what worked for you, what have you experienced that has been like detrimental to you wanting to do physics. So they're able to trust me just a little bit more because we have this social interaction on the daily. Especially for queer students, I wanted to note this because they may not be publicly out to other people. All the queer students that we have interviewed so far have been publicly out, but because this is anonymized, we can always, like, they are able to like keep that part if they're still like questioning that and able to question that inside of a place that is safe. And they're also able to not share that. Part of our informed consent procedures lets them know that there are always questions that they don't have to answer. If they don't feel comfortable answering that, we can always cut things off, because we don't want to turn this into like a trauma-based interview. We don't want to make them uncomfortable and feel unsafe inside of this environment. And so again, we are telling stories. And so we're asking students to tell a story about bada bada ba. Tell me about a professor who you felt was very, very inclusive inside of the classroom. Tell me about a time that you felt supported by a peer or by your community. And every story is going to be individual and it's always going to be different. So even when we find a common theme, each of them are unique, which is an important part of qualitative research, especially my qualitative research, just with such a small N, but also such a wide berth of people that we can talk to, is that we can't generalize an entire population from an individual stories. And the theories that we're going to talk about in a second, the theories can help us find either names for these themes that we find, or they can like point us in the direction to start looking. And so this is a large list of most of what all goes into our theoretical framework. We have intersectionality, decolonization, critical race theory, critical queer theory, physics identity, communities of practice, and critical physics identity. That's like a conglomeration of a bunch of this. And there's a motorcycle right outside my window. It should go away in a second. And so there are questions. I encourage you to throw this inside, or to put this inside of the chat, some answers, what you feel that these words mean and how you understand some of these words. These are just like a base few that I really try to talk about inside of my studies. And I really want to know what you think the words mean, and how they can help us understand the stories that are being told. So I'm gonna mute myself again because of the motorcycle and give y'all some think time on that. All right, if anything comes to you, please just throw it inside of the chat. I want to make sure that we can get to some videos because those are my favorite part. Yes, thank you, Ian. Oh, there we go. I jumped the gun on my wait time. So Ian says, queer theory, thinking beyond binaries of male, female, heterosexual, homosexual, etc., and considering spectra, i.e. queer as a verb. I love queer as a verb. Critical race theory from Alexandra, a framework for studying how laws affect different racial groups or something like that. That is very good. Again, if anything else comes to mind, please throw it inside of the chat. I'm going to give you some definitions because these topics are really, really wide and a lot of people can interpret them in sort of different ways. And so these are the ways that I interpret them in the context of my research. So definition of intersectionality, it allows us to better understand the lives of folks who live at multiple intersections of marginalization and or minoritization. And so it is people, it originally came from Black feminist theory, from Kimberly Crenshaw, who stated that the existence of Black women was more than the oppression that Black women faced was more than just racism or sexism or the sum of racism and sexism. It was a multiplication. Yes, I love that. I like talking about intersectionality with physics people as a non-linearity. It is not linear. I love that. And so it's a multiplicative idea. These things add on to each other and cannot be subtracted from each other. And it makes the experience of oppression, both systemically and individually, a larger topic, particularly for Black women, but especially of women of color. And most importantly, it doesn't describe additive properties. Again, these properties are multiplicative. And this idea of intersectionality is reconstructive. So additive versus multiplicative. If we say that identities are additive, that means something can be subtracted. That means something can be taken away. It would mean that I would walk into a room and people would be like, oh, that's a brown person. Oh, wait, maybe they're a gender minority, but we're not going to think about that right now because they're just brown. That doesn't happen in real life. You cannot separate these specific identities. This is a quote on the bottom from Chandra Prescott-Weinstein from one of her articles that she wrote, saying, "I am not a Black plus woman plus queer. I am a queer Black woman." These identities cannot be examined apart from each other, and they are always intermixed within each other, and they can't be, you can't take them off. You can always hide or like fragment them or to like lessen them, but they are always still a part of you and how people view you inside of this world. Decolonialism is really, really important. It was a quote from Chanda, I'm gonna type it in if I can, Prescott Weinstein. She wrote, a book came out earlier this year, The Disordered Cosmos. Absolutely amazing. She's absolutely fantastic. So decolonialism is an intentional centering and respecting of Indigenous researchers, students, and scholars, especially the Indigenous communities who are around you. So if there are communities, Indigenous Native people communities around the San Marcos area, and the university will help host their powwows. So we're able to host their ceremonies. They are open ceremonies, so these are open traditions to help share their knowledge with our local community and ask for support from the local community and like knowing that they exist. It's also finding out who are Indigenous researchers around you, who are Indigenous researchers who are doing similar work to what you're doing, and how can you bring them into your projects and respect their knowledge, especially when it's non-Western knowledge and we're bringing in Indigenous knowledge to the conversation. Instead of my research, this means that I'm centering the spirit of the participants, that I'm not only just asking them to share themselves, but I'm also sharing myself with them and with this broader education research community. It also means that I'm acting as an activist for Indigenous lives, Pacifica lives, Black lives, queer lives, women's lives, trans people's lives, gender minorities' lives, and any intersections and all intersections anywhere between all of these. It means that I am intentionally knowing what my work can do, like what good it might be able to do, but also like how people might be able to like use it for potential harm, and also recognizing my place inside of a colonial system, instead of a capitalist system, and actively working against that to try to bring Indigenous knowledge and the sharing of each other and sharing of humanity with other people instead of the physics community. And also just making the physics community more human in general, where we're able to have feelings and take mental health days and have all kinds of good stuff. And so critical physics identity, which I believe is a conglomeration of all of these, specifically studies intersections of physics identity and cultural resources through the narratives of Black physicists. This was developed by, I do not have her name out of here, my very, very dear friend, Dr. Simone Hyder-Adams, was working on this for her dissertation at UC Boulder. And it took the overlapping physics identity constructs written by Zara Hazari at FIU and added the racialized identity constructs from Nyla Nasir's book, Racialized Identities. And this overlap is really putting together, making this idea intersectional making this way that we look at identity intersectional and helps bring out the participants' racialized experiences inside of this. And while Simone was centering Black physicists inside of her work, they did develop this protocol also talking to white physicists. And so this research may center people of color, but we have to remember that white students are also racialized, that white is not the norm. So when we talk about racialized students, we need to make sure that we're talking about like racially marginalized or racially minoritized students, and acknowledging that white is also a race and that does affect how people exist inside of physics. And so going into part 3, we're going to watch some videos in a second, talk a little bit more about the research itself. This is my dog. His name is Puka. He's very mean. He's a bully. He doesn't let anybody pet him unless we have chicken nuggets because he loves chicken nuggets. So the big picture question that I really wanted to look at was, in what ways do gender minority people of color and LGBTQ plus physicists perform their identities in different environments? And I really want to note that we specifically want to include members of the transgender community, and especially transgender women, especially in these times of rising harm and oppression of transgender women specifically. At the moment, we don't have any transgender women participants, but we want to know that we are including them inside of this research category and are also welcome to talking to them about their experiences, which we shouldn't have to know. If the world was good, we shouldn't have to know that transgender women are women, but that is the world that we live in today. And so we're gonna I'm asking you all a couple more questions. So this is the picture that we saw before without all of my information on it. So it is blank in a way. And I wanted to take some time for us to sit together. You can share it in the chat. You can keep it to yourself, whatever feels most comfortable. You can unmute yourself if you'd like to talk about it as well. We have some time for that. And I really want to take a moment and give ourselves some space to think about identity and what identities we're bringing into the classroom, in terms of our gender, in terms of what we learn, our race, our social class, our political identities. So I'm going to give us like 30 seconds, not too much time, like 30, 45 seconds for that. So I'm going to mute myself again. And again, share however feels comfortable for you. Don't share if that feels comfortable for you, but we're going to create some space for that right now. All right, thank you guys for sharing that space with me, and we're gonna move on. I have more questions for you because again, I'm a qualitative researcher. I do interviews. I love asking questions. I love when people ask me questions. It's all a wonderful time. And so this isn't a quiz. Even though we have lots of questions, I'm gonna put numbers, but the numbers feel scary to me. Again, don't like numbers. They're very scary. And so again, share inside of the chat. Please speak out if you feel comfortable doing so. And the questions that I want you all to think about for a moment, which are questions that I do ask inside of my interviews with students, is can you describe a physicist? Separate from that, what does society or popular culture tell us a physicist is or should be? And then lastly, this is going to be a part of the clip that we're about to watch inside of a moment when we're done with this piece, is do you think of yourself as a physicist? Why and how, or why not? Oh no, anyone who's on a podcast can't actually talk. Oh no, okay. Well then share it in the chat, please, and I will say it out loud for all of, I forget how the webinars work. I mean, that makes sense, but any one of these questions, you need to answer them in order. You can say no to some of them. So I'm opening up this space as well. All right, Alexandra says, a physicist is a scientist who studies nature at its most fundamental level. I like that very much. Society tells us that we're a bunch of nerds. This is true. Again, I flew halfway across the country to go to a Hobbit party, and I did dress up. It was great. Sarah says, pop culture says it's a nerdy, usually white guy who is socially awkward or an old white guy. This is true. I mean, like, I am socially awkward, but not because I'm a physicist. I just have anxiety. So, like, this is separate. Ian says, for myself, I alternate between physicist and a physicist in training personally. Third year grad student. Very nice. I'm going to ask you if you want to add this. What causes that alternation? Like, what makes you feel like a physicist versus a physicist in training? So thank you for being brave and answering that question. It's a hard question. It's a scary question. All right. Ian says, I think it depends on the context. Sometimes it's when I want to lean on the authority and explaining things, e.g., I'll call myself a physicist when I'm leading a classroom. I like that. Again, thank you for answering. And give ourselves a little bit more time. Let's see. And Alexandra says, I definitely felt like a physicist in training when I was a grad student, even after I published. In retrospect, I was already a physicist. I love that. What helped you? What made you already a physicist? Was it publishing? Was it the training aspect? And Sarah mirrors Ian. I was figuring out how to phrase something just like that. All right, active, and Xandria says, actively doing research should count even if you aren't published. Absolutely, it absolutely should count. Cam says, a physicist is anyone who strives to add to our understanding of the universe. This can happen directly through novel research or indirectly through teaching, improving the environment for others, etc. That is also a wonderful definition of what a physicist is. Encompasses a lot of the other pieces, including teaching, changing the culture, novel research, and also just the universe is very, very good. I mean, the universe broadly is very good. Ian says, also, I'm in hep theory, so sometimes I joke that I am theoretically a physicist. That is a very physicist joke, if I've ever seen one. All right. I never know if, like I'm an education researcher and I use a lot of theories. I'm like, am I technically a theoretical physicist? Because I look at like social theory, but that's just me being difficult and loving titles. All right, so we are going to move on to talk about one of my favorite people in the whole entire world. Continue adding words inside of the chat if you would like. I can go over them if we have some more time at the end, but keep thinking about these questions if you would like to. And so we are going to watch 2 clips from Nadia. And my favorite I have a lot of favorite people in the entire world, but she is absolutely one of them. So this is a part of the interview when I asked Nadia, do you see yourself as a physicist or a physics person? Nadia was, I believe, my second interview that I'd ever done. And I had been doing research for maybe like 6 months at that point in time. And so this question came directly from Dr. Simone Hayader Adams' work, which came directly from Zara Hazari's work, where they asked the word physics person. I ended up changing that later on into the continuing iterations of the interview, because it's easy to say that you're a physics person, and I really wanted to understand if people see themselves as the word physicist because of all the cultural connotations that we have attached to that word physicist, where it has a strict definition of being an old white dude, somebody who's socially awkward, because my friends were not very socially awkward. They were all amazing. And I was socially awkward one. If it means somebody that has a PhD or is getting their PhD. So it has all of these connotations and feelings to that word physicist. So I really wanted to understand the relation that my participants had to the word physicist. And so a little bit about Nadia before we go in. Nadia identifies as half Guatemalan, half white, female, and straight. This is part of our learning assistant program. She served in our learning assistant program for 3 semesters, which is the maximum for students who are not pursuing a teaching degree. And she was interviewed before her actual graduation. So she was inside of her final semester. A few months before she actually got to walk the stage. And I want y'all to like note in the chat anything that you find interesting, anything that you find funny. I'm going to put up the text afterwards. I'm going to go over a little bit more, but I want you to think about, how does Nadia talk about being a physicist, and what things helped Nadia see herself as a physicist? And let me know. I clicked optimize for video clip. We'll see what Zoom does today. So if you can't hear it, please let me know.
Do you see yourself as a physicist or physics person?
I think now I see myself as a physics person or a physicist. I used to not feel that way. Because like someone like me being a physicist, never. But I think after like just like the past couple semesters, like getting more involved in my department and going to Q, oh my God, Q helped a lot too. And like even doing pedagogy, like that helped. Becoming an LA, oh my God, that helped me so much with gaining my confidence, because I really lacked confidence in my skills, because I didn't do well in the intro levels because I was just so like not focused as a school and I was going through a hard time. But it being in LA made me more confident in myself, and it made me actually appreciate teachers a lot more too. And it helped me define how I see myself as a physicist, and how I can like be able to say like I'm a physicist. Like when I graduate, I can't wait to tell people I'm a physicist. Like I majored in physics as my undergrad. Like it's so exciting.
So we're going to continue on with Nadia in a second. I'm going to pull up the text right here of what she said, and says it's super interesting to see others thinking of teaching expertise in relation to a physics identity. Yes, QWIP applications are open if you're interested in going. I wanted to plug that. The transcript has the letter Q, but it is Q as in CU for Conference for Undergraduate Women in Physics in January. They're regional, which is always really fun. I don't know if they're going to do it online this year or not, but yes, it is a fantastic experience. So Nadia says, she does say the words physics person or a physicist. And then she goes into thinking about like, how could I, like me as a human being, be a physicist? That could never happen. But then she started noting things that helped her build this identity. One of them was the Conference for Undergraduate Women in Physics, finding community with other women physicists who were there, doing pedagogy and learning how to teach physics as a learning assistant, becoming an LA. So our LA program, I'm not going to go too far into this, but our LA program has students who have gone through the intro levels, go back and teach other undergraduate students inside of small groups of 3 or 4 instead of our large scale intro classrooms. And they're able to go over the introductory material a second or third or fourth time, depending on if they stay inside the same subject or not. So you really are able to kind of like solidify your understanding of the basic concepts in order to teach that. And so we have like a little vein of the research that goes off into like how the LA program specifically helps build physics identity. It's very, very exciting. We're going to write a paper one day, hopefully. And so again, if you find anything else interesting, please throw it in the chat. This is the second part of this. And look for these specific pieces. We want to look at, how does Nadia note the differences between herself and physicists? And how does Nadia describe how she sees herself and her peers in classes, asking questions? So let me type this out real quick. I'm going to do differences. I'm also going to play it, and then I'm going to add up those words. All right.
Before, it took me a long time. It took me like up until I would say last semester to be able to call me like a physicist, because it was just, I don't know, I never saw myself being able to be like that, because physicists are like, they're physicists. They're like big, smart men that know everything, and I'm like, oh my God, that's not me.
I'm a small woman.
I'm a small woman that that likes to have a good time. But no, but I do see myself as a physicist. I work hard just as much as any other person in the department, and they have the same questions as I do. So I now see myself as no smarter or no less smarter than any guy in the department, which I remember I saw all the guys as like being here and I was here, which I think a lot of us can relate to, or a lot of females can relate to.
So again, here is the transcript for Nadia. And this is why it's my favorite clip, because Nadia is very short. I am also very short. And so we're literally just like small people in the department where people are like 6 feet tall. So there's that one big physical difference. But yeah, what did you guys notice inside of this clip? What did you find interesting? Yes, yay for short people. It's great. Our standing desk doesn't have to be so high, which is the best part. Let's see, Ian says, that's a great transition, looking at effort over genius or brilliance. We have a lot of genius myths in physics. We really, really do. I'll talk about that inside of one of my papers about how like the idea of genius and brilliance and this myth of meritocracy that we have is like a way to gatekeep getting into physics. But Nadia, this is like one of the things that we learn inside of our pedagogy class, inside of the LA program, which makes it really, really unique, is that we are valuing, like we appreciate the work that students do as much as like the grades they get or however they go about that. We want to make sure that we are valuing the actual learning experience and how hard they're working, and also the mistakes that they're consistently making, because you have to make mistakes, actually figure out what's going on and like change the resources that you're using to build this conceptual understanding of how physics works. And I also really, I love that. And I love the idea of having the same questions as I do, because asking questions inside of a giant physics classroom, even though our upper levels are kind of small, but asking questions inside of a large scale physics classroom can be very, very scary, because you don't want to be seen as not knowing or not understanding things. But recognizing that people have the same questions as she does, valuing progress and growth, yes. Having the same questions as other students out in the classroom, like it doesn't level the playing field, but it like puts us all on the same level where like no question is a stupid question. One of our professors, instead of asking us, do you understand? Because he knew that we didn't understand, it was quantum. That was the whole point, that we didn't understand quantum, which was fine. He never asked, do you guys understand? He would ask, are you guys okay? What questions do you have? And we would sit there and be like, I don't know what questions I have, and I don't know if I'm okay. I might be tomorrow. I'll see you in office hours. And then we would see him in office hours with our questions. And so that just like really ingrained the idea of being able to make mistakes and grow and learn. And learning is part of being a physicist. And so how does this idea help us? How do these clips help us? We didn't get to see too much of Nadia talking about her race, some of her physics experiences, but we know that we cannot separate her race from her womanhood or her physics experiences. Texas State is a Hispanic serving institution, so a lot of our students are Hispanic, which really does change the culture of our physics department. She puts emphasis on having the same questions as other students, and understanding what's helped these marginalized students succeed really allows us to figure out what programmatic and systematic change we can make to help them feel supported in physics, which is the ultimate goal of this work, is figuring out how we can change the system or take away parts of the system to better support and make sure that we have marginalized students, especially mostly marginalized students, who are staying in the field and helping us grow what physics can be and helping us understand the universe as a whole. And so that is all I have. That's the same picture of my dog. I really like him. I think he's very cute. And so please, again, I love questions. I have my email and my Twitter. I sometimes talk about science things on Twitter, but mostly I talk about hobbits. And I want you to remind yourself to be kind to yourself and to be kind to others if you're able, especially inside of this very, very hard time of a pandemic. And that's it.
Clap on behalf of everyone.
So if anyone has any questions, we have a working chat function and a Q&A button on the bottom. I'd actually like to ask, like, so I'm trying to phrase it. I'm curious to see like if your work so far has led to changes in kind of department, either policy or curriculum. Like, have you found that there's any you've been able to like have any outcomes? And is there ways like departments could kind of do almost like a self-study like this with their own students to get a sense of what they could do to make, you know, an environment. Apologies for small child noises in the back. He just got home from daycare. Is there ways you think this could work as like almost like departmental self-studies?
Yeah, you can if you have any second parts of the question, you can totally. Small children, I used to work in childcare. I get it. It's a thing. Also, we're all at home. So our research, so when we started our LA program, this wasn't like one of the expectations that we had. I wasn't here. This was like in 2008. I was definitely not here in 2008. When the LA program was started, it was started with this idea of how to build community and how to encourage community growth through the practice of learning and teaching physics. And so we found that that was, and the other research that my PI, Eleanor Close, does on her grants with that, have found that that's one of the most important parts of supporting marginalized students, is inviting them into a community and making sure that they, and recognizing that learning physics and teaching physics is just as important as doing novel research or like being inside of a lab. And so those are the small scale things that we have. We've had a lot of like, again, I wasn't here for any of this, but the faculty turnover was a lot higher before I started the LA program, which was both a positive and a negative thing because we were losing physics teachers, but we were able to start hiring undergrad physics teachers who were like down with this concept of being like, I'm really working with undergrad students, and sometimes like, not sometimes, but like they are the experts in what the students are feeling because they were part of this, and I need to take my cues from them. And so just like those hiring practices also really helped like continue this community growth that we've had and having them being interested inside the learning assistant program. I think most of our self-study ended up just being because the LA program was started with research in mind, because that was the focus of the research, was starting this and seeing how it goes. But I do also do work for Movement Consulting, which is a fantastic consulting company started by a previous PhD astrophysicist. And we are always there to like consult and talk about mentorship, and our whole entire company policy does support, or it works with the support of marginalized students, and talking to departments and like offering trainings on how to like help support marginalized students. But yeah, but also my baseline is like everyone should start an LA program because they're very, very good, and also have conversations about equity and race and stuff instead of the classroom, that as well.
I have another question. I'm considering in my new identity a baby PER researcher, because I am like you, where I found the like most math light area of physics you could go into, and in another world I would have gone to PR. Like, I am curious, and this is not less about your research, more about your own experience. How do you use the skills, say, in the regular physics curriculum? Like, how has that prepared you to succeed in, say, an education research environment?
That is a very good question. So going into a grad program, so like this is my position as going into a grad program, having coming out like doing PER as an undergrad, that like that physics training that I got as an undergrad does like linearly pertain to like do my physics coursework as a graduate student. So it's less like in the research area. But I think one of the most important parts about like my physicist training is understanding like how physics as a system works. And when doing research with students and alongside students, asking them about their experiences inside of physics, I can be like, oh yeah, I remember doing that. Or yes, I understand what you're talking about. And so like they're able to kind of like, they don't have to like put on like their explainy physics hat for the most part. And they can just be like, well, like, you kind of know. And it's like relating to students is, I think, is the most valuable part of like having that physicist training and having that background. Also, like if I end up teaching inside of a university, I should probably know how physics works also. So, yeah.
Oh, something's in the Q&A from Eric Sandquist. I'm sorry, I kept looking at the chat. How much have you been able to look at early undergrad, say, versus juniors and seniors? We see a lot of loss of majors early in undergrad, maybe before they even have a chance to see that community is available. That's an excellent question because my department also suffers from that.
Yes, that is a fantastic question. So one of our students that we interviewed was in their second year of the program, I believe. The way that Texas State does their physics department, not their physics department, their advising for physics majors is very, very interesting. I haven't gone through that process. They don't encourage you to take calculus and mechanics at the same time. And so we end up losing a lot of students who intended on majoring in physics when they go through the calculus program and when they go through the math department. Yes, thank you for coming, Alexandra. And so one of our goals is to look, and the motorcycle is back. I don't know how loud it is on y'all's end, but it is here. And so one of the goals of this research is to like increase the number of interviews that I have done and have been doing, and really look at those students inside of the early phases of their physics career. And ideally do like long-term interview studies with them. So interview them when they start, so that we can catch them if they end up leaving and learning why they left, or if they decide to stay, what helped them stay. Because yeah, like if they knew a community exists, that is one way to like help them feel supported. So that is one aspect that I would really, really like to do in the future.
I just want to say we started a new like a foundational seminar in our own department to get everyone, regardless of where their math level is, where their physics level is. And I totally want to do a study and be like, is this effective? Like, I totally would love to just pick their brains about how that's helping them develop their identity, because that's exactly like one of the issues we're trying to address by trying to get that community building early and get people to start thinking of seeing them in themselves in physics. So that's really exciting.
It's like an exciting course. I like that.
It's Carol Hood, who's one of the other Calvert people, is not here. She started it, but I always want to like talk people's ear off about it. Any other questions? Because it is 5 o'clock, so I want to make sure that if there's anyone else, they get their questions answered. Oh, David, you got a finger up.
Yeah, I wonder, have you talked to students who had gotten involved in research in any way and seen how that's impacting their feelings?
Yeah, I have. So let me see. I know research was a big part of helping them develop that physicist identity, but I think from a student at Texas State, at least, it was mostly the community and the learning assessment program aspect of it. But that also like helped them build their confidence to like get started in doing research, because they're just like, I don't have to be scared about like not knowing enough, because I'm supposed to be here to learn and do research to learn. So help like overcome that little barrier. But I believe most of our students were involved in research when I interviewed them.
Okay, great.
Viola cello duet with another non-binary physicist. I will. I'm gonna write your name down. Let's see. And there's another. Oh.
Oh, I'm finding you on Twitter, Ian.
Let's see. And then I see Cam has a question in the Q&A. Do you know of any similar physics education research being done in other countries? It seems it could be useful to learn from what other places are doing right. Yes. I'm not sure what not large, because mine's not large scale. There's not too many other physics identity there's not too much other physics identity research being done in other countries, but I know that it exists. I know people are interested in it. but it's also really interesting to note like the cultural differences with other countries that may have like different, like not just different demographics, but also just like different understandings of like colonialism and race, because it is going to color the feelings that people have around the idea of physicists, because their background is going to be different. But it is definitely useful to have those kinds of collaborations with other people to learn like what they're doing right and how people support, and if we could do that over here as well. Oh, I think you're still muted, Sarah.
Damn it, I was trying to be nice and keep it muted because of all child and dog noises. Any other open questions? If I don't see anything coming in, I want to thank you so much for kicking this off. That was a fantastic talk. Sorry, dogs are mad. They haven't been fed dinner yet, so there's tiny dog squeaks. But thank you so much. You are also muted now, but you are making happy faces, so I take that as a good thing.
Yes, just lots of thank yous, and thank you guys for having me.
It was great having you. I don't know if you have a few minutes or if there are any students left. Normally, I'm going to stop the recording.